Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten. Today we have back with us Dave Petersen. Welcome back, Dave.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're looking at the Gospel reading for the 18th Sunday after Trinity, or the 17th Sunday after Trinity, sorry. It comes from Luke chapter 14, verses 1 to 11, and I'll read that in the English Standard Version. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully, and behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now Jesus told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person,' and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." All right. In terms of context, where does this, besides chapter 14, where does this fall in the Gospel of Luke?
Well, this is in the middle of a big teaching section, really the last hurrah in a way before he turns his face towards Jerusalem. So, and it sets up the parable for the great banquet and the excuses. So he's at a Sunday eve or a Saturday evening Seder meal potentially, and then heals this guy, and then talks about how to behave at a wedding banquet. And then the next thing's going to be, how to accept an invitation, I guess. So it does seem like there's table fellowships on the table, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
is there a connection to what precedes it? His teaching about the narrow door, dining and reclining at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then some are last who will be first, and some are first who will be last. That you get. Is there any sense in which the man with dropsy is last, and he is exalted by Jesus in the midst of these people, and they are all humiliated or humbled in the sight of Jesus here?
Yeah, you also have that in chapter 13, where Jesus heals on the Sabbath and the ruler gets upset, and he says, "Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall, lead it to water?" So, I mean, it does seem like maybe there's a theme going on here, and their failure. I noticed when you were reading it, I was following along in Greek, and it says, "Behold, a man." Where's that? I got to get back to chapter 14 now. At verse 2, "Behold, there was a certain man," right? You can translate "behold" as pay attention or take notice, which is precisely what they don't do, right?
Yeah.
That they're not paying attention to that man. They're not entering in the narrow way. They're seeking advantage over one another or luxuries, and they're right. I mean, they're doing exactly what he says in chapter 13 not to do, right?
So he's the way it's set up in verse 1 is Jesus is in how you might say hostile territory, right? Because they're watching him carefully.
Oh yeah,
and that indicates to me like he's he's welcome but unwelcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this one of the first times where Jesus poses the question first in looking at the circumstances? I mean, you do get the thing where he's the man the paralyzed man who is let down from above. He notices their what is it? It says he knows their thoughts because he's watching them talk among themselves, and then he poses a question to them. But how often does Jesus do this? Where he, in the situation, he's clearly taking the seat of honor. He's being the host here, isn't he? Because he's directing the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly is taking control of the conversation. I don't know that they would recognize him as taking the chief place. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, to be sure, he's the Lord of the Sabbath, right? And I mean, he's obviously the Lord of the banquet as well. But then he doesn't behave in ways that, yeah, it is funny how much he just doesn't care about. He's so different than us, you know. We always care. I mean, the fallen flesh is always aware of what other people are thinking of us, and wanting their good opinion and wanting their approval and wanting them to like us, you know. And he just does not care at all. He only cares about his Father and fulfilling his Father's will, and he just does not play along.
Yeah. So what is that, when he asks the question, is it lawful? Is he trying to get them to engage with the actual scriptural text? Does he have something in mind here?
Well, that's a good question.
Does he have a Bible verse in mind? Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I don't think he does have a Bible passage in mind. I think the point is there isn't a Bible passage, right?
Well, you do have in Deuteronomy, and this would go along with what we've talked about before, you know, when in certain of Jesus' teaching, it's definitely the 10 Commandments, right? Like the Sermon on the Mount. In others, he's got this kind of connection to the teachings in Deuteronomy on, you know, what just warfare is or how to interact with other people. In Deuteronomy 22, he has the whole, you know, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down by the way and ignore them. You shall help him to lift them up again.
But there's nothing, okay, but there's certainly nothing about a Sabbath. There's no caveat there about the Sabbath, right? It doesn't say even if it's the Sabbath, you should do this, or even if it's a Sabbath, don't do it. I mean, there's no Bible passage to justify what they're doing. Yeah.
It's just right? You know, you shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and ignore them. You shall take them back to your brother. And if he does not live near you and you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home to your house and it shall stay with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. And you shall do the same with his donkey or with his garment or with any lost thing of your brother's, which he loses and you find, you may not ignore it. This is interesting, like, because what follows this in Luke in chapter 15? All the lost stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I mean, in any case, it's certainly a rhetorical question, right?
Yeah.
I don't think he's leading them. I think the point of it is to expose them that they're doing this not really as an honoring of the Sabbath or the keeping of the law, right? They're just doing this because they're selfish. I mean, and I mean, it's a combination, right? It's a lack of mercy on their part, but it's also impotence. I mean, what could have they done? It wasn't as though they could heal the man. So I think that's sort of right. It's not as though he's asking them to heal the man. They're complaining that he's doing something on the Sabbath, And it's like they've just kind of found a technical detail to complain. It's like the tone police, It's they can get out of everything by just finding this one detail.
Yeah.
So, I was sleeping with your wife, but then the way you came and confronted me about it was, was not polite. Therefore, we'll pretend like nothing happened.
Right.
And you have no right to criticize because you failed. And I mean, that's kind of like, Jesus is healing
Not
people.
only that, you have the worst sin.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The worst sin is impoliteness, to hurting my feelings. Right.
Yeah.
Getting overcome with passion when you talk about my passion.
Yeah. I don't know.
So,
I mean, I get that sense, but just recently we had the discussion of, what shall I do to inherit eternal life, or what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he points them back to the Bible. So I'm wondering here if their response to the man who is before them with dropsy is, here they're ignoring him.
Yeah, well, I think Jesus is saying, look, is it lawful to tell me why it's not lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Give me your text. I mean, I think that's the point. You don't have one.
Right.
There's no Bible passage that says don't heal on the Sabbath. Right. So, they're pretending.
And in fact, there are Bible passages that indicate that you should do something.
Do something. Right. So,
help him and take him in until this lost one is found. Right.
So, how do you take the textual thing in verse 5? What did the ESV say? Does it say a donkey or an ox, or does it say a son or an ox?
It says a son or an ox.
Oh yeah, I like that. I think you can read that as a son or even an ox. So it's the sort of look. Of course, you'd do this for a human, but you'd even do this for an animal. So, but yeah. Again, right? So I don't know. Does he there? I mean, you could think he has the Deuteronomy text, but it seems like the question in 3, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, is find a passage that says, yeah, I don't know. How could it not be? Maybe that's the other thing. Who has the power to heal? Right. Only Jesus.
I mean, he's already been accused of breaking the Sabbath by healing.
Right.
So he's.
No, I know, but I mean, it's just.
Go ahead.
There are no laws. There are no laws about healing on the Sabbath because it's not a problem. I mean, this would be like we don't have laws about, not turning water into wine during the worship service, right? We don't need a law about this because, right, nobody can do this. And, it's the fact that Jesus is healing means he gets to do what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is kind of insane that they complain about this, right?
Yeah.
And not just that healing is an objective good, that of course, right? But also, this isn't just an objective good. This is a reordering of creation. This is God at work, and you're trying to, you're standing there going, well, actually,
Well,
I mean, when Jesus heals somebody.
It's definitely an argument from the greater to the lesser, right? From the lesser to the greater. If you are going to do this for a son or an ox who has fallen into a well on the Sabbath, which Deuteronomy rightly tells you to do, obviously it's okay to heal on the Sabbath.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing is it's crazy that they would complain about him healing. It just shows how just totally wicked they are. No matter what he does. Yeah, they're gonna complain, and it just shows. This is the the epistle from a couple of weeks ago that the works of the flesh are evident.
Yeah,
this is a work of the flesh.
Yeah,
this is evident that this is just envy and stupidity, and just they're refusing to recognize an objective good in their midst. And what do you think about this?
How do we do this? How do we refuse to look at an objective good in our midst?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, this kind of being silent in the face of the need to speak is a problem. It seems like when I was trying to think about this, it seems like we're more prone to be silent about evident evils. The works of the flesh are evident: adultery, sorcery, idolatry, so forth. And we can't seem to notice them, right? But do we, objective goods that we don't speak of? I don't know. I can't think of an example. I'm sure we do it. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, it seems as though the Pharisees here are, myopic. Right? They are just focused on one thing to the exclusion of all the other things, and unable to say, okay, but dude, he just healed.
Well, they're hypocrites.
Yes. But
So,
how do we play that? I mean, how do we become so myopic on one thing that we just take the Gottesdienst crowd, for example? I mean, how do we, as people who uphold the historic liturgy, see the centrality of the sacrament of the altar, how do we ignore good things outside of people who are upholding that? And just counts?
Maybe we don't recognize
fair, but
no, I think I was going to say, maybe it's we don't recognize, this doesn't exist anymore, but the goodness of promise keepers, say.
Okay.
Or maybe it's the we don't recognize the allies that we have in the evangelical world in the culture war because their doctrine's not pure.
Yeah. So is it in a sense like we just kind of play into this Hegelian dialectic of action and reaction, thesis and antithesis, where it's just this constant pendulum swing, and not actually just saying, okay, here's the truth in this. Kind of like what you said about, when you were growing up, you would have the question around reading the Bible, what does that mean to you? And that there was something good in it, but it all got rejected for, that's too subjective.
Right.
What?
Well, I think we do this all the time, of course, because our flesh is so weak. And I think, like the Pharisees and the lawyers here, we are seeking an advantage over one another. I mean, that's what I was kind of getting with Jesus just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He is not seeking an advantage over the Pharisees and the lawyers. He's not trying to, gotcha and then be superior in some way. He doesn't need their honor or and he loves them. It's not that I don't mean he doesn't care about them, but he doesn't, it's so different. Even like you just think about, standing in front of the confirmation class, we want to be liked. We want those kids to like us. We want them to think we're funny. We want them to think we're smart. We want them to be, kind of moved by what we're saying. I mean, our egos are always kind of in the middle of this. And it is not, and I don't mean that, we're not, I hope we're not, full on Pharisees, hypocrites, of course, but there is this sort of thing where, maybe not with the confirmation class, but maybe at a Winkle, or, that we are kind of seeking an advantage over one another. And
well, and this is too, like that, the way you just described that would also help us not kind of fall into the trap or devolve into like middle wayism or middle roadism, because that can be just as much driven by envy and strife and seeking advantage.
Oh, yeah. Right. Because it's about being liked and about not being offensive and about, right. And how do we, it's so easy to say, it's so hard to do, right? How do we actually speak the truth in love? Right. So have both sides of that equation. And, we tend to advantage one side or the other, depending on how we think it will benefit us, I think. And this whole thing, I think the whole table ethics stuff and where to sit is really about not seeking honor among men the way that the way that men seek honor, right? So this whole thing is
thus trusting in God to raise you up.
That's right. It's God that we want to say, "Friend, come up higher," not the human host, right? What we want is honor in heaven. We want to be noticed by Jesus, so we want to be weirdly the guy with dropsy, actually. Right. Yeah. The one guy nobody wants to be is who we want to be.
Right.
I was thinking about this dropsy. This is a dropsy. I don't know. This is an affliction of water,
Yeah.
right? So presumably, what's the is it edema or something? It's swelling. It's supposed to. They're retaining water, so they're in pain and they look grotesque. And I don't know. Can it kill them?
Yeah. I mean, if you get water around the heart, doesn't that?
Okay. I don't know.
I mean, I think it ends up being some kind of heart disease too. You're not getting circulation.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking about this. What interesting to be an affliction of water, is it's a strange sort of thing. This again, this sort of everything needing to be within the order of creation. Too much water is not good. Whether it's a flood or here, just choking you from the inside. It's interesting in a perverse way, I think, how everything except grace can go wrong. I think grace is the only thing that can't be abused, that can't become an idol, that can't kill us. I often think about this with the miraculous catch of fish. I love that the fish are almost killing.
What do you mean by that? Because I can think of ways in which we abuse grace.
Well, then it's not. Okay, but then I would say it's not truly grace. I mean, it's we're if we presume upon grace, then we're not responding correctly to it. But that's not. I mean, grace itself, you can't have too much. I guess maybe we put it that way. I take it back. I repent. Not abuse, but a too much.
Okay.
Too much water is bad. Too much grace isn't. Right. Too much food is bad. Right. So, I mean, too much of most things is bad, but not this. I think there's something there.
Can you have too little?
Too little grace. Oh, what? Oh, that's I don't think so.
So it can't be quantified.
Can't be quantified because a smoldering wick, right? I mean, a little bit of grace is plenty in a sense. So you can't have too little. It's either, it's binary, right?
Yeah, you get
all
it.
The cool
or
kids.
You have it or you don't.
Yeah, but you can have too little love, maybe, or too little truth. Could you have too much truth? How about faith? So maybe this is a weird way to even talk. I don't know. But anyway, this is an affliction
could go
of
off
water.
the rails, of us.
I think it already has. Yeah. Sorry.
But I mean, I think you make a good point. Like, grace isn't a created thing. It is an attribute of God, isn't it? So you can't have too much of an attribute of God or too little. But created things you can.
Okay. Yeah, that might be the way to think of it. That which is creation, we need the right amount of things. We need the right amount of oxygen. Too much oxygen's not good, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, an affliction of water that somehow makes him grotesque and they don't want to notice. And behold, like it's so funny too, because behold is such a huge word, that you expect at the end of behold, right? The angels, God in the flesh, right? Something magnificent, and it's a man with dropsy. And I think, I know that's a small detail, but I think this is what God cares about. Like, this is what, to him, here's the interesting bit. So we would like walk into this room and we'd be like, ooh, what are they eating? What sort of drinks do they have? What clothing are they wearing? And, how is their house decorated? And, and who's there? And what are their titles? And, and then here's this guy, and this is where Jesus' interest sits. Behold, hey, look, I got great news. There's a guy with dropsy here.
Yeah, so it's obvious all of us would notice that. We'd notice if we walked into a place and there was this kind of grotesque person swelling with water. But it would cause us to look away. And Luke is saying, look. And I think, again, I when I hear this certain language, right, when you have that tis there, a certain man, that is parabolic language. I'm not saying this is a parable,
But this is right. That's the kind of right. A certain man gave a banquet. A certain man was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. This unnamed person, but he's a certain one. I don't mean he's not a historic figure, but I think he is meant to be significant and meant to be noticed and meant to represent more than himself.
So are we all drowning? Is that what you're getting at?
I don't know. Probably. We're probably all overfed and over luxuriated and
over medicated,
but also grotesque to other people and in need of healing. I mean, we've all been, mistreated by the popular kids at some point, right? And we've all been out of place. We've all been ugly, felt ugly, right? Or whatever it was, either because we were, we got plenty of I got some swelling in me. It's not an affliction of water. It's an affliction of fat.
Well, okay. So
so
where does this man with dropsy fit in kind of like the guilt shame paradigm? He has shame because of his dropsy. Obviously, he's disfigured in this manner, as you've described. What sort of guilt does he bear for that? Is this an affliction that he's brought upon himself?
Well, I thought somebody once.
To what extent?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some of the early church fathers talk about, it's a wealthy man's disease. It's the kind of disease. Yeah. It's the kind of disease that you're drowning on the inside, but you thirst. And so you keep drinking, you keep consuming water, even though that's not what you need.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, I just don't know.
I don't know either. And he doesn't, he's silent. Jesus is the only one that talks in this whole account.
Right.
He's silent, and so are the Pharisees and lawyers.
What do you make of that?
And Jesus, I don't know. I mean, their silence is wicked, of course. They're the teachers of Israel. They should be able to respond to this question. His silence, I don't think is wicked, but I don't know what to make of it. Again, though, as a parabolic figure, sort of somebody that's representing, maybe that's why he's quiet, because we don't get a talk in this either.
Yeah, I mean,
he takes him and heals him and lets him go. Yeah,
they remain silent and they do not reply.
Yeah, you got this. Then in verse 6, then that I love this that they would not render a judgment on these things, right? That they could not answer him. And they just, right, they don't have the strength to answer him or the ability. So it's not that they don't have the knowledge. I mean, they've denied the knowledge because of their hypocrisy. So then he tells a parable, right? When he notices how they're jockeying for position, right? How that they're choosing the best places. And they're seeking honor from the wrong people, right? And then you have that statement again.
Remaining
in verse 11.
silent before Jesus, is that good or bad?
I think it's bad.
Okay.
I think we're supposed to respond to Jesus
when he asks.
I'm not blaming the guy with dropsy. Well, that for sure.
Yeah.
But I think also we should respond to the healing. I mean, I think the dropsy man should say, "Thank you." Right? Amen. Something. And I'm not saying he didn't. I mean, it doesn't say he was silent. It's just that nothing's recorded of him. And I think probably just because that would be a distraction at this point. We don't need, he's served his purpose by being this person that's healed. And it's the silence of the Pharisees that's being condemned.
Okay. So how does the parable relate? Is it because he can tell they're jockeying for position?
Yeah. And, they didn't even consider, they're not even trying to impress this guy with dropsy or trying to impress Jesus, right? They're looking for favor from the guy that hosts the meal because he's the one with money. And, he has what they think they want. And then you get the 11.
Yeah, so they're not trusting in God to exalt them.
No, they're not.
They want to try to make it happen themselves.
Yeah, they want to make it happen themselves. And they're not, I mean, I know we just harp on this all the time, but I really think they're not living in the present, right? And they're not living with the people right in front of them. You know, they're trying to gain something in the future, right?
Okay.
Some sort of honor, some sort of favor that will be owed to them, some sort of, right, again, advantage that they're going to be able to use in the future. And they're so focused on that, which is all really material, instead of, again, the actual people. And they shouldn't be jockeying for position at all, right? And
so why does
it's not so much?
So chapter 14, you have this thing with the dropsy guy, and you've got the places of honor, and then you got the great banquet. Why does he focus on the people jockeying for position, for favor with the one who invites? Why does he take that on first, do you think, and then goes to address then the one who invites, to say, when you invite, these are the people you should invite?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so I think there's kind of three different ethical considerations. So the first one, taking the lowest place, has to do with, not seeking honor among men, but humbling yourself so that God can exalt you. And then the second one, not be inviting people for the sake of earning favors, right? Those who will pay you back, but doing it in love. And then the last one is, not even recognizing, who the real giver of the feast is, and accepting the invitation in the first place. And so it's sort of backwards in a way. Like, I think chronologically, it would be, first of all, you got to accept the invitation. Then secondly, you have to go with pure motives, not trying to gain favors. And then lastly, take the lowest seat. But it seems like they're in chronologically reverse order, but I do think they're interrelated.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, there is a Eucharistic application here as well. Not that this is Eucharistic exactly, but I think that what we see is that fellowship with God is around the table. And, so I do think there's applications of this to Eucharistic practice.
So should we assume here that Jesus was given the lowest spot?
Oh,
or that when he came and he took the lowest spot?
Yeah, I've thought about that. It doesn't say. I wonder if he just sat down like a total bore in the highest spot. and then they were annoyed with him because he wasn't playing by the rules. I mean, I don't know. I could sort of see him doing almost any of it, not even paying any attention to what the protocol was. I could see him doing that, or mocking them by doing something like taking the highest seat. But I could see him taking the lowest seat too. It's sort of funny. Whatever he does would have irritated him. I mean, they know about Proverbs 25. It's not like Jesus made this parable up completely right then on the spot. So, but you could say that of everything. I think for Eucharistic practice, this is, at Redeemer, we do not observe rank at the distribution for this reason. So if you look at like the Roman Catholic books, it'll say, first of all, you commune the deacon, and then the subdeacon, and then the lector, all this. And we do observe rank for processions. But at distribution, the celebrant communes himself, and then he just communes the people in line. And so if there's an acolyte in the way that it's arranged up there, if there's an acolyte in front of the synodical president, I give it to the acolyte first. I don't commune the president of the synod, and then, that's a personal thing, but I don't like the idea of there being rank at distribution.
Okay.
And I sort of base it on this, right? That at the Holy Communion, we're just all poor sinners. There's no rank, right? And the acolyte's equal to the bishop or whoever it is. So I also don't like the idea.
But this is like, this is, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but what Jesus is saying is, you do kind of recognize that that someone else recognizes it. So like you don't
true.
claim it as a right, but that it's good for other people to recognize those things.
Yeah.
It's not claimed for yourself, but given.
Right. That's fair. And I mean, I don't think that there's, I think, we do observe rank in processions. So, but anyway, well, I mean, the other thing would be, it always sort of worries me a little bit. I don't want anybody to get any special treatment at communion. So I've always made this argument for why I think the celebrant should commune himself. Part of that is because he should get it the way everybody else does. So rather than having the only person that the elder gives communion to is the pastor, or the pastor, really the worst offense to me is the pastor waiting to the end and communing last, because that indicates to me that he's the host and he made sure there was enough for everybody else first. I mean, that's how I was taught, right? That's what you do when people come to your house for dinner. And so if you do that at communion, that is to me sending the absolute wrong signal, because you're not the host. You don't go last, right? You need to be cleansed for this work, and you don't get it differently. Or, having the wife come up and, kneel next to you, that really is a big show that I don't care for. Because, again, right? I think it should just be done again, right? That the reason the pastor receives it first is because he needs it. And the reason he gets it from his own hand is because that's how everybody's getting it at that service. Right. So it's not a special ceremony. It's actually a conformity.
Correct.
But I also kind of worry about, it worries me about with these like these low gluten things too, or, special wine delivery vessels. And in the most ideal world, right, it would be nice if everybody would just receive from a chalice the same way.
Yeah.
And if everybody would, but, we have a few individual cups here. So I don't think it's an abomination.
No.
But it is an unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's, I wouldn't see it as a contradiction to the institution.
No.
But I do think it is not the preferred ideal practice.
Yeah.
I don't think
I wouldn't see the.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wouldn't see the pastor being communed by the elder as an abomination to the institution either.
Yeah. But I mean, there are certain things that I would say, like online communion is contrary to the institution. Because you can't say this is my body and mean that over there.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So
and of course, using something other than wine
in front of you.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
So
open communion, giving communion to people that are not examined.
Yeah.
Giving communion to unbelievers, communion to people that aren't in unity with our doctrine as a regular practice.
Yeah.
These sorts of things. Not using wine, not using bread, right? Not using the words of institution. These would be abominations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you can talk about better and worse practices. You can rank that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. According to what it teaches.
Right. And we have to recognize that there could be some disagreement about that. And also there could be legitimate reasons for compromise.
Yeah.
And to endure and suffer less than the very best practice for the sake of love.
Yeah. So for example, when I got to my congregation, they weren't using the chalice at all. And it was kind of like, well, that has to be there. You don't have to take from, I'm not going to force you to take from it, but it has to be there. Like this is part of the institution, right? He took the cup. But as time goes on, more and more people are receiving from the chalice and less from the individual cups. It's not like I'm going to just take that away and change their practice, but I'm going to bring it back into conformity as much as I can.
Yeah. That was the Evanson rule, my predecessor here. He always said that when you're making changes, when pastors make changes, you can add things, but you should never remove things. Mm-hmm. And that was, I mean, he didn't have a theological principle. It was just a managerial principle, or a way of, moving forward that wouldn't be shocking and disturbing. So he would agree with that. You can add a chalice, don't take away the individual cups. Mm-hmm. You could add genuflecting, but, you don't take away their freedom to stand if mm-hmm. they want, that sort of thing. So adding ceremonies, adding stuff, he was always in favor of that. And it was exactly what you're talking about, that with the hope and the expectation that it would, grow over time and people would come to appreciate it and so forth. So I found that an interesting way of thinking about it, to mm-hmm. add things, not take things away.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure you can do that with everything. I mean, some things maybe do need to be taken away, like if mm-hmm. it's an abomination. And of course it's the toughest probably with hymns, but if it's in the hymnal and they're used to singing it and they love it, it's going to be pretty hard to take it away.
Right.
But maybe you should anyway.
Yeah.
Or at least take it away some,
not as much, not have it as much, or.
Yeah. But that's a tough thing. If it's in the hymnal, that decision really has been made for us by other people. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to undo, because they know where all of the evangelical and American spirituals are in the hymnal. I mean, you can put great Gerhardt and Luther hymns in there, and they're not hurt by that at all. It doesn't affect them. They don't recognize it. They don't care. But you put one, they know where every Wesley hymn is.
Right.
'Cause those are all their favorite. They are just like children. I mean, It's like they know where the candy is always.
Okay. So let's get kind of back to the text. So you were talking about the three ethical things. So is this part of your fivefold use for training in righteousness? Those three ethical teachings that Jesus has.
Well, or maybe, I don't know if you want to do all. I mean, the third one is not part of the pericope. It's the parable of the banquet, or the Great Supper.
I know, but you'd want to bring that in, don't you think?
Well, you could bring it. You could. Well, sure, you could easily enough. But yeah, maybe we do need to talk about how we behave, and do some thinking about how it is that we are silent when we shouldn't be. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever when doing the parable of the great banquet, have you ever we make a big deal in the Sermon on the Mount when it says, when you fast, not if.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever done something to the effect of, like, when you give a dinner, like, not if this is part of who you are, as you are inviting people into your homes?
That's great. Oh, that's a pure Braatenism there. You've been waiting for that for a while, I think. Yeah, that's great. That's good. That's really a good. No, you're right, though. No, I haven't, but I like it, and I think you're right. We do. Maybe this is part of the ethical reality, is that we are expected to actually show hospitality to our brothers and sisters in Christ, mm-hmm. and to live together outside of Sunday morning some.
Yeah. So is the modern American approach to this, or maybe just the modern approach, is we'll get around this just by not doing it.
Yeah. There you go.
Got that covered.
Well, are they, though? I mean, I think maybe they're not giving dinners, but they are, they are seeking friends that they like to be around. And I mean, right, they're hoping everybody needs friends. And I'm hoping, I like him. I hope he likes me. And, I'll invite him to play racquetball, and hopefully he'll accept. And then he'll invite,
So is this a text then to talk about what actual godly friendship is, or what we pray for in the fourth petition, good friends, faithful neighbors?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that we're not just seeking to use people. or to find advantage, the all of those. It's too bad that the Zig Ziglar book, the How to Win Friends and Influence People. It sounds so awful because it sounds manipulative, as though the whole point of this is just to get them to buy stuff from you so you can be a good salesman.
Right.
Because really he does like the sort of, kind of golden rule there is to actually just pay attention to other people.
Right.
And, sort of consider things, to be kind. And that does win friends and it does influence people. But
it's the same thing with some of these other like negotiation books, like Chris Voss.
That's right.
Never Split the Difference. His thing is like, interesting people are interested. So if you want to be interesting to people, you have to take an interest in them. They will find you completely interesting.
Maybe this would be a time to talk about, like you said, how to be a friend, what we're looking for, and then maybe even, maybe we need some advice on how to make conversation. Like even, I was just talking to somebody about if all you can talk about is, the sort of Lutheran doctrine of election and, the Guinness Maestaticum, and, it's like, can you have a normal conversation with people? And why can't you, and maybe you need to develop this, So it could be a related thing. When you have a conversation with someone, it's not just waiting for your turn to talk and to tell them about your comic book collection. You need to.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. I've been there. I don't collect comic books, but I've been in conversations like that.
Right. Where they're just, So,
well, okay. What about this then? Also, like, how often is it the case that these, we're not recognizing rank, but how often is it the case where people who are younger than you in the office, let me put it that way, for you particularly, or, maybe, younger than you, they're just trying to make conversation and they don't know how. And we just let them falter instead of like stepping in and being the host, like letting our time be taken up with conversing. All they want to do is talk to you.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's a good rebuke.
Yeah. Is there a sense in which, people who are older here should be, this is a rebuke to them to say, you should be actually opening your homes to these people, to teach them how to be fathers and mothers, and to show them the wealth of knowledge that you have learned in the school of experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you could say, so let's take this right to the clergy. You go to a pastor's conference and maybe don't just hang out with your own friends.
Yeah.
And who is
Ramirez has this.
I
got this from Ramirez. He says this is why he says pastors' conferences have to be over 2 nights, because if it's only 1 night, you're going to spend only the time with your friends. But if it's 2 nights, you set 1 night aside that you're going to sit with people you don't know to get to know them, and the other night you can spend with your friends.
Yeah, but that's a good rule.
Yeah, that's his rule, and I try to follow that. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and maybe you need to let them talk about their comic books, and try to be interested in their comic books and see if there isn't more going on there than you know. I remember Scott Stegmeyer is a real interesting guy, and I remember. He's a prof out at Irvine. I remember him telling me about horror movies. I have zero interest in horror movies. I don't like them at all. Mm-hmm. But it was, of course, there's all sorts of things about horror movies that I have no idea. And I remember, just talking to him about this. And as he got talking about it, it was fascinating to me how, anyway, that there's more to it. He sees, I think rightly, he likes horror movies. This was a long time ago, but because they actually deal with spiritual themes and they take the supernatural seriously. And so he was like, he wasn't, saying they were wholesome or good necessarily. He was just saying there's kind of more going on here, and there's kind of an art form, and there's different things. And so it was like, horror films, I can't even, that's not something I'm interested in, but his interest in it and his knowledge of it, made me realize at least that there's more to it than right. So,
and he would make a distinction, wouldn't he, between, because I think I remember some of these conversations, he would make a distinction between like a real horror film and like just a gore film.
Yeah, he could have. I still don't have any. I don't want to watch any of them.
Yeah.
The idea.
There was a time when I was
scared,
younger where I enjoyed like a scary movie more.
Really?
I don't anymore. I don't know why.
I get too scared. I get too scared.
Well, that's how it is now. Like, because it's probably because I didn't believe in all the evil stuff as a young man that I liked getting scared. But now it's like, this stuff is real and I don't want to be around it.
I even find the screw tape letters scary.
Yes.
Because it's like, this is probably happening, right now. There's demons talking about me and I'm not doing a very good job of, so it, yeah. Well, anyway, I didn't mean to get off track, but I just,
there's this whole line of podcasts now looking into kind of the, all the lore like Bigfoot and Mothman and there was a few reform guys out in Ogden. Is it Idaho? Anyway, they their podcast is called Haunted Cosmos. And basically, the whole thing is like they go through all this lore about all these supernatural things that happen, and they're just like, "Look, this is demons. This is demons active in the world," and that kind of stuff is actually kind of catching on in terms of people interested in, I don't know, the maybe the horror. And they're labeling it as, look, alien sightings, that's demonic. And it's kind of interesting. I haven't listened to it, but I hear from some people who have.
I heard Harold Ristow say something to that effect on a podcast.
Yeah.
He said, we believe in the supernatural, and we believe in, that God does a miraculous thing in the sacrament of the altar. He says, well, kind of goes both ways. If there's supernatural good, then there's likely. So I thought that was a pretty convincing argument in a way. Well, in any way, the point would be is that maybe spending the time to have a conversation, just because at first this is a boring topic, horror movies. That you're like, I don't care about this. I'm not interested. You could be interested in the person. That's talking about it. And you could find out why he finds comic books or horror movies or Magic, the card game, so interesting. And, you could be interested in the person and you could let him talk about it. And there's something to be said
and perhaps the thing would be also that in being interested, they find you interesting and you can show them a better way.
Yeah, that could be too. Yeah. And you could also, demonstrate how to be a conversationalist, right? In a way that's actually Zig Ziglar-like, that's actually loving your neighbor and just saying, hey, how about I could tolerate being bored for 5 minutes in a conversation. I don't have to be entertained every minute of the day, right? I could, if I was talking, my 2-year-old granddaughter's conversations are pretty boring, but I'm not bored in them.
Yeah.
Right. They're the best. I love them. But if you had wrote down you wouldn't be, because you don't love her. Right. And so it's, the thing is that's why, we love the person. And, and even if we're a little bit bored for 5 minutes at a cocktail party at a pastor's conference, come on.
Yeah.
We don't have to be entertained all the time, and we don't have to be the center. Right. We don't have to be the one doing all the talking either.
Yeah. It's being willing to be lower, to listen to somebody else.
So that's the big question for me. How do we cultivate a right desire for godly honor? What is godly honor? And how do we, because as you say, he doesn't dismiss that there's honor to be had.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I think in the Proverbs 25 reading, it starts out with this parable about the banquet, and then it does get into this whole thing about a word fitly spoken, which plays into this again. This, I think we typically, when I've heard that, I've thought in terms of kind of doctrinal stuff or preaching, but as I was reading it this morning, I was thinking about it in terms of actually just conversation again, just actually, to be able to just be there for somebody else. And
does that word fitly spoken, does that tie into later in chapter 14 where he talks about salt without taste is worthless?
There we go. Oh yeah. Good. Yeah. We should actually have a word fitly spoken would be, again, the truth spoken in love, right? Both sides of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
So compassionate, right? Interested in the other person,
Well, but I think it starts with
also
trust in the word and promise of God.
Yeah.
Right. That the word works. Like the word, the gospel is going to work. The word is going to do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't return to him void. And so we're not going to try a bunch of like needling tactics to force the issue. We're going to use the word.
Yeah.
And we're going to trust that, that it is God who's going to exalt us, even if man puts us down.
Yeah. The funny thing is that, it's being humble. Like, it's so ridiculous for us to think that if I act, with humility, gently, right, patiently, bearing with one another in love, as though if I do that, somebody's going to take advantage of me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that isn't the way it actually works.
So
we don't get taken advantage of when we do that.
No. But at the same time, like, I know we've talked about this before, but humility is like submitting yourself. It's like it's subordination.
It is. Yeah.
And so what are you subordinating yourself to? And will that be recognized as humility by the world? Because we've talked about this before, where when you actually subordinate yourself to what the Bible says and you speak that confidently, that seems arrogant to people, although it's actually humble.
Sure. Well, I think, the thing is that I don't think we end up regretting it. Like, I don't think we behave. We don't keep the law and then go, oh, it's because I did this, because I was kind, I was taken advantage of. Or, because I spoke the truth, they put me in jail. I mean, we're like, I'm glad I spoke the truth. I'm glad I was kind. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, I think, when we're talking about, dealing with one another, this kind of lowliness or this humility is that I'm not the most important person in this room or the most important person in this conversation. And, the thing is, when we do behave that way, in the normal world, I mean, there's extreme situations, if you're in front of Herod, that's different. But, in the normal world, if you behave as though you're not the most important person in the conversation and your time's not hugely valuable, and all that kind of nonsense, I mean, you're not taken advantage of. It actually does, people like you. And, you could actually maybe then have a word fitly spoken that could be heard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's not much risk, is my point. I think, there is this, this kind of posturing, this jockeying. We're going to take the higher seat because we're afraid we won't be invited to go up higher. But there's really, what's the worst thing that happens? We stay in the low seat and we sit next to a boring person.
Yeah. And you're still invited.
You're still invited. And in fact, there's opportunity there for real good. And, we might learn something.
Mm-hmm. So what are you gonna preach on? Like,
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't know much after all that talking.
I mean, is there a doctrine that is coming forward here?
I think probably that we can't be silent. I mean, that's got to be, that we're required to speak and we have something to speak, and that we're called upon to be merciful. and that we're called upon to live in conversation. We're in fellowship with one another in the Holy Communion, but also beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And how we treat one another matters. I mean, that's the epistle as well, by the way, Ephesians 4. So you've got, more of that paranesis stuff. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think this idea of maybe I've never really, this is sort of, Art Just's table fellowship stuff, but I wonder if we could take Art Just's table fellowship stuff and extend it beyond the Eucharist to daily life. So the Eucharist becoming defining for how we see one another and how we treat one another, right?
So,
these are the people that...
So this isn't just like, this moves beyond the looking at people as created in the image of God, but looking at particularly those whom we commune with, that they carry around in their body the body and blood of Jesus.
Yeah. And that the body and blood of Jesus should be honored in them.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we not only receive the pledge from our Lord, as Luther says, here I pledge you, what he's giving, the forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation. But in communing together, we are also making a pledge to one another.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
So what are we pledging?
Well, love, material goods as needed, right? I mean, what you've done for the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me, right? We make a big deal about he who hears you hears me with the office of the holy ministry, but you also have this in Matthew 25, what we do for the least of these, the brothers of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So, this is the family of God. These are the brothers and sisters of Jesus and his mother. I mean, how then, there's that old saw about, if you knew who the real saints were, I think, is that Luther? Like, you'd fall down on your face in awe of this, scullery maid or whatever. But, instead you're impressed by the Pope. And, he's on to something with that. The people that we're kneeling beside, on Sunday morning, we just really don't know who the most significant of them are, except that we do know they're all significant, in the sense that these are the people we're going to spend eternity with. And we should be happy about that.
Yeah. So maybe that is the way to go, like towards the Eucharist. If we're invited to the Lord's table and we're taking the lowest seat, he's obviously honoring us by inviting us to his banquet, giving us a foretaste of that banquet that shall be. But in the meantime, how does that play out in how we're bound together? What do we share? What do we have in common besides the body and blood and the forgiveness of sins?
Yeah. How does that define us? Right. And how, and not just defining us to ourselves, but how we then define others that have this, whether they recognize it or not. I mean, whether they recognize it in us or not. Yeah.
Okay.
Endeavoring to keep the unity of spirit in the bond of peace. That the family of God is worth fighting for, worth striving towards this unity. I mean, think of how much effort and we spend trying to keep our biological families together.
Yeah. No, that's good. So what is there? Do you have some practical things that you would want to point them, like brass tacks? I
like your dinner idea.
Okay. When you have a banquet, not if.
Invite people into your home.
Yeah.
I did a thing when we called the associate pastor. I went through and tried to figure out what are the sort of virtues in the Bible, that the pastors are supposed to exhibit. And
hospitality.
Hospitality, right? And so I actually had put that down to that. I think one of the things, in order to be hospitable, your house has to actually be ready to invite people over to.
Yeah.
And so, it doesn't mean it has to be spotless, but I mean that we would actually create spaces, that are comfortable enough. And maybe we need to lower our standards of cleanliness and neatness, but then also maybe we need to put, if you can't ever have anybody over because your house is just trashed, I think that's a kind of a problem.
Yeah.
Because
I think you're right, but I also think we need to get away from the idea of like having people over is entertaining them. Like hospitality is not entertainment. Like we're not having like an entertainment party where we are there to, yes, we want to make them feel comfortable. We want to do a whole bunch of things, but we're not just giving them a good time. And I think a lot of people think of having people over as kind of an entertainment thing instead of actually opening your home to be part of where you live and have your being. Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah, it does. I've not thought about it. I'm just, but I like it. The idea that, right, that you're treating them as family.
Right. Yeah.
So
they get the comfortable chairs because we have to bring out the, you always have to bring out extra chairs, and I or Lauren or the kids get the hard chairs, and the guests get the comfortable ones, you create a space that is conducive to not entertainment but to conversation. Right? So
yeah.
You gather in a place that doesn't have a screen. Do you have a room that doesn't have a screen that dominates the whole thing?
Yeah.
Like, have you thought about where you are where you'd have people in terms of if you had them over? Like, where would you have them?
Yeah. Well, and, maybe too, thinking about how you can involve them. I think, it's actually when you go to somebody's house and they let you help with dishes, when you're not going to a restaurant.
Right.
And so, maybe too, thinking about how when people offer to help, letting them help.
Yeah.
And because that's like a sign of intimacy.
Entertaining, right?
Not entertaining them. Yeah, no, you're right.
Right. So
you're not entertaining them.
Or if they offer to bring something, you're like, no, I'm doing this all for, yeah, of course. How about this?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And it's meant to be like this is, but that if they don't offer, you're not mad.
Right.
I mean, this is, it's not entertainment. And I also think like you're not inviting them over to show them how to do it.
Right.
In other words, like in some cases, you're demonstrating how to do it, but you're not trying to make a point like, see, obviously I do it best.
Right. And you're not trying to get an invitation back.
Right.
It's actually because you want to spend time with them.
Yes. It's about them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. I like that. That's there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty. Well, we'll pick up again next week. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Thanks, Jason.